She was in bed, it felt like all of the time.
When these things happen to someone, it really pushes them to acceptance of what's happening. It's not always that easy.
The doctor said, there's no cure. We knew that already. Then we were looking at the rest of our lives.
This whole picture of my life, of who I would be as a mother, as an adult, was impossible. It was something that I would never, ever achieve.
Welcome to The Incurables. I'm Don Wildman. Judi Bachrach lived a life in motion. As a young woman, her relationship with movement and dance was unparalleled. Judi loved to be outdoors and was always active. One winter, when Judi was 16, she took a solitary swim in the steaming waters of an outdoor pool. But when she tried to emerge from the warm water, Judi's muscles refused to move. Alone and in increasing panic, Judi eventually pulled herself to safety. Unknown to her then, this was the first sign of a disease that threatened not only to immobilize her, it could also take away her life.
My mother had multiple sclerosis, and she had it through much of my childhood, but I didn't know that. She didn't know that.
We had seen how Judi's mother was dealing with her increasing symptoms of MS. She was a working musician who led steel drum street bands in Brooklyn and taught really tough kids. So it was very physical, setting up steel drums on the sidewalk and at fairs and all this, and teaching these kids. But we watched her become a kind of stumbling, physically compromised person.
But in those days, they hardly ever even told patients they had MS because it was so serious and devastating. So my mother, they suspected it, but there was no clear-cut way of testing for it. And like a lot of people, her MS must have gone underground for years, which is exactly what happened for me.
Judi and I met registration day, freshman year in college. I knew the first moment I saw her that I was going to spend my life with her.
Dance was very much part of my meeting Richard also. Dance and theater. I was an apprentice at the Woodstock Playhouse when I was 16. I was going to be an actress, definitely.
Judi's involvement with dance and music was intense.
I think I have always loved movement.
She moved with great determination, but she was a very interior person. And so Judi's dance was very much about self-reflection.
When I was dancing, I felt like I didn't have to use my voice, I didn't have to speak, and I began to learn about the power of movement, just a gesture. And the whole audience of people would be just watching my hand. I loved that feeling. I thought that was amazing. Movement really saved my life.
Judi and Richard were friends during their years at Bennington College in Vermont, and eventually they married. After graduation, the couple moved around the Northeast, eventually settling back near Judi's hometown in southern New York State. It was there that the couple welcomed their lovely little girl, Amelia, into their home.
My first memories of growing up definitely involve being outside a lot and being with my family outside, and very active and playful with my family.
It took me a few years to anticipate having another baby, but when my daughter was 3.5, we just felt like it's time. There's just too much good feeling going on here. We have to invite somebody else into our family.
We had an okay but somewhat difficult experience with the hospital and the doctors and all that with Amelia's birth. It didn't have the ambiance and the quality of peacefulness that we wanted. So we thought, let's do a home birth.
We knew the whole process. We were very delighted to have a home birth.
The actual birth turned out to be anything but what we hoped for.
What most would consider a wonderfully magical childbearing experience devolved into a horrific nightmare for the Bachrach family. Judi suffered from acute abdominal pain. The time between Judi's initial contraction and her second daughter's birth was a scant 45 minutes. The rapid delivery was very stressful for Judi and her already fragile body. The newborn was so traumatized by the ordeal that she stopped breathing. For 8 days, doctors struggled to save her life and were ultimately successful. Eventually, things returned to normal for mother and daughter, but this brief respite proved to be the calm before the storm.
The following December, she started having some hip and leg pain numbness. But within a few more days after that, the numbness started really creeping in.
At first it was like superficial numbness, but then it went deeper and deeper and deeper into my legs, until finally I was completely dead numb. My legs were like concrete, like 2 logs. When I went to see the chiropractor, he just did various testings. He said, no, it wasn't from a strain, or wasn't pressure on muscles, probably just new mother fatigue. You probably just were doing a little too much. But I called him back in a day or 2.
The doctor was concerned enough to examine Judi again. That's when her entire life turned upside down.
And we're sitting there, and he examines her, and he, it's all very low-key, and he says, well, we should probably do a spinal tap, but I'm pretty sure you have MS.
Judi Bachrach had been told by her chiropractor that she had MS, the same disease that had killed her mother. A spinal tap performed by her neurologist confirmed the diagnosis.
Judi's initial reaction was anger.
I didn't want to know that I had MS, because that was my mother's disease.
Indeed, much of Judi's identity at that time was living a life that was different than her mom's life.
I had a very big vision of myself as a very hands-on, very involved mother, and I wanted to be that for my second daughter the way I had with my first daughter, and I realized I couldn't.
I'm thinking, well, I remember when her mom was diagnosed 10, 12 years earlier. So I said, all right, 10, 12, maybe 15 years, Judi's going to be like this. In fact, Judi was like that within a couple of weeks.
If you look at the history of people with MS, there's usually some type of stressor that may bring this on. And we know that stress has an effect on the immune system, that MS is related to some type of immune dysregulation. There's a lot of stress around the time of Judi's second daughter's birth, and so that was probably the real beginning of her downward spiraling with MS.
My education around MS in those first couple of months was around how astoundingly fatigued a person could be when they hadn't moved.
It is a fatigue that's been described as no other. A fatigue that you can't get up. You almost can't get out of bed.
I was utterly exhausted every single day. It just felt like I was at the bottom of a well, and I could never climb up to the top to ever see the light.
We would either bring the baby to her to nurse, or she would kind of stagger over to a chair or something to nurse. And then after nursing, it would be like she had been working in the garden for 6 hours. It really taught me how to be helpless. My life became functioning as efficiently and effectively as possible, covering everything that Judi was unable to do, and changing my lifestyle and trying to give Amelia as peaceful and ordinary a life as possible, because I didn't want to drag her into this.
My biggest memory is that my mom was not accessible to me all the time, and that she slept every day for many, many hours.
Over a long period of time, after months, it was like, okay, I understand this. I could keep choosing to deny it, or keep choosing to fight against it, or keep choosing to be angry, or keep choosing to be very sad and sorry for the loss of the dreams, or I could say, this is reality. This is what I have. This is what I have to do.
Movement and activity had always played a central role in Judi Bachrach's life, but in a matter of months, she was debilitated by MS. Her body had betrayed her to the point that she could not even play with her own children. While she was understandably enraged by her immobility, Judi was determined to reclaim her health.
Eventually, she began to come to terms with the disease as a partner rather than an adversary.
I did a lot of internal experiments with sound and movement and arranging my body in different, I put a pillow under here or over there, arching my back so I would take in deeper breath, and what was it like to get more breath into my lungs, and how did that affect my legs, and did it, and nourishing myself in a very interior way.
Besides being a dancer, she also had a very interesting approach to life. So in some way, when these things happen to someone like that, it really pushes them to this whole thing of acceptance. Judi, of course, she struggled with that a lot. She had a lot of resources to pull in, both inside herself as well as a very, very strong family, a strong relationship with her husband.
I feel like as a dancer, I took my body for granted. Leg, move there, leap across the floor, express, jump, Chopin. And suddenly, when I didn't have any of that available to me, there was something far more exquisitely sensitive, internal, that was beginning to reveal itself to me. So I went into a lot of exploration about different movement modalities. Even though I couldn't move in the way I was used to moving, I was still moving. And I felt that I was discovering inside of myself a source of aliveness and body intelligence that would serve me for the healing process, that the body wants to be well.
For 8 years, Judi was able to lead a relatively normal life. Although the effects of her MS would return in varying degrees during that time, she could work and care for her family. However, even for someone as strong as Judi, this disease had an insidious propensity for working its way to the forefront of her life, often triggered by stressful events. For Judi, a strenuous move into a new house brought back her darkness.
And when we were done, I had a big collapse. That was really hard because I really felt clear that I was losing ground. I felt very vulnerable to everything. Having my older daughter run in and tell me what was going on, I almost couldn't hear what her troubles were.
I definitely pulled back when I was 12 and 13 and wanted to do things on my own.
I definitely worried about her. My Asperger's limited my ability to really express emotion and sympathy, so I didn't know how to respond to her.
So in addition to my MS is my daughter's learning disabilities. So this is when we moved. This is what we were going through.
A debilitating disease like MS can lead to depression, and in turn, depression can open the door for the disease to infiltrate further. It's a vicious cycle from which escape can appear virtually impossible. One form of treatment involves steroids.
She's very sensitive physically, and she said, "It's not right, I can't do it, I'll never take steroids again."
And then I just began lying down all the time. I couldn't sit up, I couldn't stand up, I couldn't walk, I couldn't stand up for more than like 20 minutes at a time. I was just way too exhausted. I thought, gosh, if I could only sit in a wheelchair, that would be so good. But I couldn't sit up in one. I was just utterly drained.
Richard simply couldn't stand by and watch his once vibrant wife bedridden and miserable. He contacted an MS specialist in New York City.
I said, whatever. I'm not filled with the fire of self-healing at this point in time. I'm overwhelmed. My system is just shutting down. We have to do something. I'd be a fool not to try anything I could possibly try.
The doctor tried 2 separate drug protocols that didn't really help. Then there was a glimmer of hope when a third drug seemed to limit the effects of Judi's condition to a certain extent.
So I'm not getting worse, but I'm not getting better. I have maybe a half an hour in the morning when I can get up, move around, eat breakfast, and I'm in bed. That was my life. That was my life every day for about 3 years.
Judi simply wanted her independence back. Her doctor referred her to a physical therapist near her home. There they addressed Judi's lack of sensation, muscle weakness, and balance. In addition, they worked on the chronic pain in her lower spine. Judi decided she'd also visit a local Pilates instructor.
When Judi first came in to work with me, she really couldn't sit up for more than 15 minutes or so at a time. So she was quite weak, and her energy was quite low.
Judi's background as a dancer would benefit her greatly in her exercise therapy.
All of that knowledge is in her body, is in her tissues. I could see that she had the muscles that she needed to sit up, but she was unable to feel them working, unable to feel whether they were working, and also because her nervous system was affected by MS, she was unable to deliver the message from her brain to sit up.
Maya developed specific exercises to help re-engage the muscle groups in Judi's body that had lost sensation. In concert with a routine physical therapy, this new targeted exercise regimen seemed to help.
Then, in January of 2006, an old friend calls me and says, I met this woman who says she's cured herself of MS through a diet. And she said, so can I give her your number? Do you want to talk to her? And I said, oh, yeah, sure.
So I met with Judi. And when I met her in a coffee shop, she had propped herself between a chair and a post so she could sit up.
And she comes bouncing in, and the diet, and this and that, and this and that, and I've written all this information down, and you really ought to try it. Go home, and I read the book.
Ann Sawyer had developed a diet program that targets 5 common food triggers that she found could cause the severity of her own MS symptoms to increase. These included dairy, eggs, yeast, legumes, and grains containing glutens. The diet could be tailored to an individual's particular condition.
And I think, wow, this is really interesting. I've given up wheat before, but not all at the same time as I gave up eggs, as I gave up dairy. I said, this is interesting. I'll try it.
Judi had been suffering with the severe effects of multiple sclerosis for over a decade. Drug protocols and exercise therapy had helped, but she still wasn't where she needed to be. Could Ann Sawyer's diet prove to be the answer?
In 1 week, I'm being on the diet, and I just went cold turkey. I gave up everything. And again, it wasn't that hard for me. I felt the skin between my toes. I haven't felt the skin between my toes in 10 years, 12 years. Week 2, I began definitely to notice I had more energy.
She called me after a while, very excited. Something in Judi's tone that just struck me about how interested she was in the book, and she knew food. So out of my mouth comes, how would you like to be my co-author?
The idea of taking on the monumental task of writing a book would have been inconceivable in Judi's previous condition. Now it was possible and intriguing.
So I'm actually talking with Ann about the possibility of being her co-author and having an intelligent conversation. In fact, thinking about recipes. In fact, thinking about writing. In fact, sitting with my laptop on my bed and beginning to write.
She was very excited and she wanted to share it with her doctor, which is, a dubious proposition in most instances. And he said, you are getting stronger. And she said, great, I want to get off the Copaxone. And he said, well, I don't know, tell me more about the diet. So she says, okay, no saturated fats, no yeast, no wheat products, no eggs, and his face goes. We said, what?
He said, well, I have to tell you that the proteins in the drug Copaxone are suspended in albumin, which is chemically what egg whites are.
So Judi's injecting herself with a potent allergen every day.
I said, I really want to go off this drug. He said, you can't go off it yet. And I said, well, I won't go off it today, but I'm telling you, I'm going off this.
Judi doesn't consider herself cured of MS, but she can move around on her own. Every day, she gets stronger.
40 years is a long time to live with MS, but I'm not getting worse. I'm not at some awful plateau. Every month I can look back and say, oh, I have more sensation here. And for me, as soon as I have sensation somewhere, I figure out a way to exercise and move with that part of my body so that it becomes that much more engaged. To fully be alive, to really engage with your life, requires paying attention. It's almost a gift to have MS. or any illness where you have to begin to pay attention again. You're motivated finally to say, whoa, what's going on here? What is really going to work for me?
I would say the main way that living with a family that is visited, in my case by two of its members being chronically ill for a long time, is it's taught me to not take anything for granted at all, which is perhaps the greatest gift of my life. Because when you don't take anything for granted, you are able to really inhabit the moment fully. And that's where all the richness of life is. I'm not interested in the future like I used to be. I'm interested in what's happening right now.
A great dancer is acutely aware of every part of her body and its artistic movement through space. Judi Bachrach was a great dancer whose awareness of her own finely tuned body had been compromised and ultimately taken away by MS. Having watched her mother die from this relentless disease, Judi was determined not to suffer the same fate. For decades, nothing helped. Then Judi met Ann Sawyer, whose seemingly miraculous diet taught her to eliminate the foods that triggered the disease. It was a discovery that enabled Judi to take back her life.